Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Trans Plus 201. My name is Meredith Swinney. My pronouns are she and they, and I will be the moderator for this session. We have a great session coming up for you. Our panel will expand our knowledge from Trans 101 to 201. We will cover important terminology, experiences in the lives of Trans Plus folks, barriers to authentic living, and ways you can be an active ally. If you have questions throughout the session, please feel free to submit them through the Slido link that is provided in chat. We'll be holding time at the end for Q&A. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our panel. Please welcome Rodrigo Hangleighton, the Executive Director of the National Center for Transgender Equality, to the Intuit stage.
Hello, everyone. That might be the first time in my life I've ever had walk-on music, so what a moment here. Thank you for having me today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in at home or home office and all of you being in the room. I'm so excited for all of today's session. I mean, Intuit's really been a spectacular leader and really at the forefront of this diversity, equity, and inclusion work for so long, and we're so grateful. Again, my name is Rodrigo Hangleighton. It's a hard name, so Rigo for short. He, him pronouns work for me, and I'm the Executive Director of NCTE, the National Center for Transgender Equality. I'm also a transgender man myself, so come to this work personally and really honored to be able to help lead NCT's mission to protect transgender people from discrimination.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rigo, for being with us. Also on stage with us today is a program manager at Intuit and a member of the Intuit Trans Advisory Board, Tanner Arnold. Tanner will be adding his insights throughout our discussion. Tanner, if you can take a moment to introduce yourself.
Why, sure. Thanks so much for having me here. My name is Tanner Arnold, and I am a founding member of Intuit's Trans Advisory Board. My day job is working with QuickBooks Payroll. Shout out to all my peeps out there. As a tax compliance program manager. I've been with Intuit for over 18 years. I began my medical transition to male about 4 years ago. And I'm proud to say that Intuit has welcomed and supported me in all the ways I'm me over those 18 years. It was just a few years back, Jessica mentioned that she and our good friend Natalie Ryan thought they were the only transgender people at Intuit. And now our small little group of 5 ragtag trans plus folks have turned into over 125 people, trans plus people, non-binary, gender fluid people, and family members who are loving and supporting their trans plus families. It's just amazing.
It's wonderful
that we're here.
Woo. Yeah.
Yes, clap is good. It's good.
Thanks, Tanner, for sharing your story. Before we get to the heart of the session, we want to set the foundation by covering some key terminology we'll be discussing during the Trans Plus 201 session, but also throughout the day. There are a few terms that we'll be focusing on that are going to be definitely much more pointed to our discussion. Tanner will now take you through the gender unicorn.
Here's my friend, the gender unicorn. And really what's important here is to think about these things separately. They don't exist together, right? One of them is not reliant on the other. And gender identity is really that internal feeling of being male, female, a blend of both, another gender completely, or a feeling that no gender matches your internal sense of self. It's important to remember everyone, every single person, whether cisgender, transgender, anywhere in between, has a gender identity, that feeling of who you are. Gender expression then is just how you carry yourself and what you look like and how you're comfortable in your clothing, your hairstyle, your mannerisms, a lot of other observable traits that you may have. And we need to also remember that societal norms have changed over time. Hello, think about wigs, right? Lots of wigs. George, England and the wigs. And those things have changed over time. And we need to challenge the thinking that things or ways of presenting ourselves are inherently male or female, and we need to point to the fluidity, see what I did there, fluidity in gender expression over time. And then one big note on this too, who a person is attracted to has nothing to do with their gender identity or their gender expression.
Thanks, Tanner, for providing that foundation. And now, Rigo, will you tell us the differences between transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, and intersex?
Sure. So again, we'll walk through some of these definitions, but language is changing all the time. We just want to make sure to set a foundation. So first off, the word transgender. Really, being transgender means that your authentic gender is somehow different than the gender you were assumed you were going to be when you were born. So for example, for myself, when I was born, they put an F for female on my birth certificate. My parents raised me as a girl. And spoiler alert, that's not how it all turned out, right? I changed my name, changed a lot of things about myself, and came out as a transgender man. So transgender is sort of a big term for any kind of experience like that, where your authentic gender, what you really live as every day, is somehow different than how it started or how it was assumed to be. And the word trans is sort of just shorthand for the word transgender, or also trans plus, a way to have a more expansive definition there. So then genderqueer or non-binary, you might have heard these terms before. These are more specific, sort of under the trans umbrella for a lot of people. And they are about someone whose gender identity is not either being a man or a woman. For some people, they might feel like they're somehow a blend of the two, or somehow in between the two, or feel like neither of these boxes fit at all. But it's that idea of not being that simple, either a man or a woman. A lot of non-binary or genderqueer people use they, them pronouns, but not everybody. There's a lot more pronouns that you might not have heard about before. There's things called neo-pronouns like ze, them, and really the most important thing is that you can't assume anyone's pronoun just by looking at them. And we're going to talk about pronouns more later in the session. Gender fluid is the experience of someone whose gender is dynamic or can feel like it changes day to day. And then lastly, intersex. Intersex is actually an umbrella term for a whole series of medical conditions. So it's not, some intersex people are trans, some intersex people are not trans, but we do find that there's a lot of confusion about those experiences, so we want to include that here today. There are all sorts of different medical conditions count as intersex, and it's really just any medical condition that puts you outside of the totally male or totally female categories. So that can be because of chromosomes or hormones or physical body parts, any sorts of things. And again, it's important to not make assumptions or assume that everyone is either in one category or the other.
Great, thank you. So we've introduced the basics of trans plus identities, and yet there's still so much more to know. Pronoun choices have grown more inclusive and creative, as has our understanding of gender on a spectrum, as Rigo just mentioned. People who are trans plus are not a monolith. They experience the world differently based on their unique ecosystems and expression. Trans people are all people. There are a few additional terms we'd like you to know that are important in understanding and discussing trans plus identities. Gender dysphoria is the feeling someone may experience when their gender expression and gender identity, as Tanner just talked about, clash. People who feel gender dysphoria may want to actually transition, but it isn't essential. It's important to know that not all trans plus people who transition actually experience gender dysphoria. And transitioning does not require medical intervention to be official or valid, but a lot of trans plus folks do access medical care to affirm their gender. This includes hormone therapies, treatments, puberty blockers, and surgeries, as well as behavioral training. It's crucial to understand that transitioning takes time and often isn't easy. Intersectionalities influence how a trans plus person navigates their transition. Race, ethnicity, geographic location, and class, education level, access to reliable and safe healthcare all have an impact on trans persons' journey.
Sure, and in addition to all of these ways to potentially medically transition, there's also non-medical transition. So that means things like, depending on the person, it can mean coming out, going by a different pronoun, going by a different name, can change dressing and grooming, so how you dress, or cutting your hair, growing your hair out, things like that. All of these are different ways to non-medically transition and are just as important for any given person. And for a lot of trans people, there's a lot of joy that can be associated with this. In pop culture and in the media, there's a lot of focus on the negative parts of being trans, and those things are real. They really do come as a result of discrimination. But there's also a lot of positivity and elation and excitement that comes out of this. So Meredith mentioned the term gender dysphoria. That's the distress that a person can feel from all of this. But there's also now a term, gender euphoria, that many of us who are trans use, which is that joy and that excitement that you can feel from finally being able to live as your authentic self.
When transitioning, a trans plus person may also feel that the name they previously responded to, their birth or dead name, doesn't fit them anymore. Tanner, can you tell us why it's important to respect a trans plus person's name and pronouns?
Yeah, absolutely. Respecting a person's pronouns can literally make or break our day. And it doesn't hurt anyone. Using a birth name and incorrect pronoun, especially in public, hurts. I have seen the joy drain out of Jessica Dark's face, out of my cisgender wife's face, when they are misgendered. And it sets us up for being physically attacked. If somebody were to overhear you misgendering or misnaming a trans person in public, they can come after us. Not to mention, you'd look pretty weird calling me she or using my super feminine birth name in public. People probably be looking at you pretty weird. And we use names other than what's on people's birth certificates all the time. Ask Pink, Charlie Sheen, Lady Gaga, The Weeknd. And don't worry about messing up. Ariana said it a little while ago. We know when somebody is intentionally trying to hurt us versus just getting used to a change. One trick I use to get used to changing pronouns in my own friend group is I find a song. Find a song that uses pronouns. Love songs. Love songs are excellent for this, especially country ones, which just makes it more fun. Find your favorite singing spot, blast that song, but change the pronouns. It's so hard. So hard. But those are the muscles. Remember those muscles that you're using to try to remember to change that song that you've known for years to another pronoun? That's the muscle you need to stretch when somebody in your life provides you with different pronouns or a different name to use.
I love that trick. That I feel like I need to practice that more.
In the car or shower.
Car or shower, got it. Those in my hotel are really going to appreciate me later. So we want to invite you to keep these concepts in mind today and throughout all of your sessions. And if you hear a term or an idea that you are unfamiliar with, we have included a longer list of terminology at the end of our slide deck that will be available after the Trans Summit. And of course, as a plug, don't forget to submit your questions if you have any. So what does everyday life look like for trans plus folks? As mentioned earlier, trans people are all people with goals, hopes, challenges, and lives shaped by the complex surroundings and their relationships. Trans plus folks want what we all want: safety and acceptance and fulfillment in life. However, trans plus folks need to navigate a world that was designed by and for cisgendered people. So let's dive into some of the data from the 2015 NCTE Trans Survey. 23% of respondents experienced some sort of housing discrimination. 77% of those who were out or perceived as transgender from kindergarten to grade 12 experienced some form of mistreatment. and 59% of respondents avoided using public restrooms for fear of confrontation or other problems. This data feels pretty startling. Showing up authentically in our places of work is crucial to our sense of belonging and ability to thrive. Rigo, how does this experience look for trans plus folks?
Well, feeling accepted at work, whether you're transgender or anything else, feeling accepted at work is critical to being able to be productive at work, to stay motivated at work, and to feel engaged in your workplace. For trans people, one of the ways that this shows up, one of the ways that we can really feel whether there's that acceptance is real or integrated or not, is how much we can accurately self-identify. So that can mean things like, for example, if you change your name, can you start going by that name in your company email address or on the company directory, even before your name has been changed legally? Because changing your name legally is quite difficult. It can be expensive. Depending on where you live, it could actually be impossible. It might not even be doable. So can you, when you come out at work and adopt a new name, can you actually start using that on all of those places where your name is listed in the workplace? Also, if you're filling out, let's say, a company survey, can you check the gender box that is right for you, even if that's not the gender that's listed on your health insurance or other kinds of employee paperwork? These might sound like bureaucratic details, but they make a difference to how much we can actually be ourselves at work. And they also help keep any medical information that should be private, it helps keep that confidential. So things that might look bureaucratic on the surface can make a very big difference in a trans employee's day-to-day.
Thanks, Rigo. So Rigo mentions workplaces are a microcosm that can support trans plus employees in ways to allow them to live authentically. Tanner, you've been at Intuit for a while, as we've heard. How has Intuit helped in succeeding to have trans plus communities thrive here at Intuit?
Yeah, thanks. And, first of all, it literally starts at the top. Our executives model integrity, empathy, and a willingness to be vulnerable in order to learn and grow. Without their commitment, we wouldn't be here today at our 4th Trans Plus Summit. And our executives continue to model a commitment to our trans plus community and trans inclusion, and they hold each other accountable. We police ourselves, and it starts at the top. Next, we were leaders years ago when introducing an anti-discrimination policy that includes gender identity and expression. I probably wouldn't have even submitted my resume if we didn't have that type of anti-discrimination policy publicly posted. And it hasn't always been easy to implement changes, but I've really seen what power a focused group of allies has and the great things that they can do. And now we have the ability to self-ID, much like you mentioned, without having to worry about how that impacts our health insurance or where else it is. Employees are able to change their names. That's their email name, their directory name, their corporate user ID, long before they ever set foot in a courtroom. We've committed to building gender-neutral bathrooms into all new construction of buildings, and we are well on our way of putting gender-neutral bathrooms into any existing building that we had that didn't have them previously, and I mean well on our way. We have companies like Slack and Zoom who help enable us to have our pronouns visible to anybody we interact with. I meet with people in other countries all day outside of Intuit, and they see my pronouns there, and it starts the conversation about what that means. And where restrictive legislation has been passed, we're working with employees to ensure equitable access to health care so they and their families and children can thrive. We aren't perfect, nobody's perfect, but we are always committed to learning and growing.
Thanks, Tanner. And how can these experiences differ for trans plus folks depending on the stage of their journey for self-expression?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Rigo mentioned, transitioning takes time and can often be out of reach for some folks. The less a trans plus person passes in society, which is being recognized as the gender we feel inside, the more chance we have of adding to those difficult statistics that you were sharing. Most of us want nothing more than to be just recognized as ourselves, to pass in our day-to-day lives. Passing allows us to live as stealth, where no one ever clocks us as being transgender. And it's the greatest feeling because it comes with a feeling of being safe. But some of us may never pass, and there are a lot of reasons for this. One of which, preventing teens from being able to work safely with their doctors, we are forcing them to go through a puberty that will just reinforce the stereotypes that cause them not to pass. We're taught from a young age what so-called male and female traits are. We're never taught that the singular they has been around since the 14th century. I'm sure my senior English teacher is very happy with me. And that leads to how each of us views gender growing up. And then workers in customer service, we're taught that saying ma'am and sir to a customer is polite. But I really challenge every single person out there who works with the public to stop using gender in your interactions. We can give great customer service without using ma'am, without using sir. And it's even more important over the phone. Because if we can't medically transition early enough, or we can't afford to medically transition at all, we may never be able to fit society's definition of looking or sounding like a girl or like a boy. But then also think of all the folks who are cisgender and may have deeper voices or higher voices, and how can you tell that over the phone? And then our non-binary and gender fluid folks that may just never fit into either one of those molds, and so let's not assume. And that can be when it's dangerous to be trans plus, right? To not pass in a society where that is certain that we're trying to harm them or other women. It's to live in constant fear. But is it really about protecting women or protecting kids when my cisgender female wife, who uses she, her pronouns, who has short hair, who hates dresses, is called sir all the time and is constantly kicked out of restrooms, women's restrooms? So when it comes down to it, changing how society perceives and reacts to gender isn't a trans thing. It's an us thing, as in all of us. We just want to live in a body that makes us feel comfortable, but we deserve more than to just survive this world. We deserve to thrive.
As Tanner mentioned, barriers exist that impede the lives of adults. And the past few years, in face of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen it more. Though we have all been able to adjust our lives, our work, to be at home, young people have faced different hardships of schools and social spaces. And we've specifically seen this in our trans plus athletes. Being allowed to play their favorite sport at school, for many, is no longer an option. Rigo, can you tell us a little bit about the Let Us Play campaign?
Sure. The Let Us Play campaign is a chance for all of us to stand up for trans student athletes. Many of you might be familiar with Title IX. Title IX, at least here in the United States, especially for those outside the country, a refresher. And if you're not a policy dork, then here in the U.S., even a refresher too. Title IX is basically this law that establishes non-discrimination protections in schools on the basis of sex. Well, these policies, all of the nitty-gritty details about how to make these non-discrimination protections real, get updated all the time. And pretty soon, here in the United States, we expect the Biden administration to release an updated set of regulations about Title IX, so about non-discrimination protections in school on the basis of sex. And we expect that the next set of regulations is going to delve into this topic of basically, can trans kids play school sports anymore in the United States? So when those regulations come out, it is critical that all of us who support trans people, and especially trans youth, speak out and submit public comment and say that you support trans youth being able to play on the sports teams with their friends just like anyone else. You know, this might seem like a controversial issue these days, but it's important to remember that trans kids play sports for the same reasons as anyone else. They're trying to get and stay healthy. They want to play with their friends because it's a social activity too. And sports teach important skills like teamwork and discipline and sportsmanship. And this is being characterized as some kind of new controversy these days, but the truth is trans kids have been coming out in school districts around the country for years now, and local school districts and local sports associations have already been handling this successfully for years. So they know how to do it right, and preserve fairness. There's no need to make a political football out of it. So again, we really encourage you to sign up with NCTE to learn about the Let Us Play campaign, so that as soon as these new regulations come out, we can notify you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So as Rigo mentioned, living authentically is essential. It can, however, come with a number of roadblocks specific to the trans plus community. And some of these barriers feel truly insurmountable. Much of what can be a barrier is not only access to care, but the political and cultural climate one lives in. There are a high number of anti-LGBTQ legislation introduced at the state level, and some of them at the federal level, negatively impacting the lives of trans plus folks. But it isn't about the legislation, it's about beliefs within communities we live. Here's a few additional pieces of data I'd like to share. 30% of respondents reported being fired, denied a promotion, or experiencing another form of mistreatment relating to their gender identity or expression. 11% of respondents reported that all of their IDs had their preferred name and gender, while more than 2/3 of those reported that none of their IDs had their name and gender they preferred. And finally, 25% of respondents experienced a problem with their insurance related to being transgender. Rigo, your work touches on the lives and many different experiences of trans folks. One aspect that is important to all people is, of course, healthcare. But as we've talked about, it's politicized here in the United States, it's politicized across the globe, unfortunately. Can you tell us why trans plus healthcare is so important?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's important because any of us as human beings need healthcare to live healthy, fulfilling lives, right? Regardless of whether or not we're transgender. For transgender people specifically, we do often have needs around transition-related healthcare, so any kind of medical procedure that helps you live your authentic self. And this is now being characterized, like you said, in a controversial way. But the truth is, this healthcare has been studied for over 4 decades. It's long been studied, long examined. There are standards of care that doctors use all the time to make sure that this is done responsibly. And this is recognized as essential primary care by every single leading medical institution in the United States. That includes the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics. All of these institutions have studied different kinds of transition-related procedures and said, you know what, this is essential primary care. They have all come to that same conclusion. But right now, that exact kind of healthcare access is being undermined all around the country. There's and then especially it's become controversial when it comes to transgender youth. So I really remind everyone that just like I said that transition-related care has been studied for decades, that goes for young people as well. Transition-related care in those under 18 has also been closely examined by medical authorities to really make sure that this is done in as safe and sound a way as possible. And the good news is that we have guidelines to make sure that that happens in the right way with the right societal support and supportive parents in particular. And this is supervised closely by medical professionals. So it's critical that we roll back these legislative attempts to try to ban an entire type of healthcare. At the end of the day, this is just healthcare like any other, and no one should have to face increased barriers to going to their doctor or getting their kid to the doctor for medically supported treatment. And then lastly, there's also a whole other dimension of trans plus healthcare, which is the healthcare that you need just because you're a person, and then you just happen to be trans. So what I mean is a trans person can get the flu just like anyone else, right? You can get a broken bone just like anyone else. But if you happen to be trans and you go to the doctor for something like that, sometimes they'll look at your broken arm and say, oh, I don't know, maybe it's because of those hormones you're taking. So we call this trans broken arm syndrome. The discrimination that you might face, or the rejection or even skepticism you might face from a medical professional, even though what you're there for has nothing to do with your gender identity. So it's important to keep in mind that healthcare for trans people is, yes, about the transitioning process, but it's also just about being a human being with a body that needs a vaccine from time to time. So access to transition-related care, including for young patients, and just the healthcare treatment that anyone else might get, are both important parts of living a healthy life as a trans person.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the things that sticks with me is that the healthcare system is difficult to manage as a healthy person who is cisgender. Trying to be a trans person and navigate that system is difficult. Maintaining your healthcare coverage while you're transitioning, and then, as we've already talked about, is your name and gender marker changes. So you've got these different hurdles. Tanner, what steps do you suggest trans plus folks go through to overcome some of these hurdles, and what resources are available?
Yeah, sure. First of all, almost every state has an organization that can help with some of these hurdles. If you're not sure, I just Google it. I live in Arizona. I live in Southern Arizona. We have an organization, the Southern Arizona Gender Alliance, that is really, really helpful for all things transgender. If you're not sure in your area, look up the NCTE's website. They have resources for every single state. So it'll point you to the right places, and then you can start researching. I'll give a plug for my wife. Find paralegals in your area. You don't need a lawyer. Paralegals are cheaper, usually cooler, biased, but they can help you through some of these things. If you don't know a paralegal in your area, ask me, because I can have my wife try to look it up for you. Sorry, honey, you're going to be busy. But it's also important to remember that the name change for a trans plus person is not the same process that people think of for a name change after marriage. Some states require letters from doctors. Others may require a person to publish a public notice for weeks before allowing a petition for name change. Like, we're just running from the law. Like, Forensic Files is on our tail. Most of them require notarized applications. Good paralegals are also notaries, so 2 birds, 1 stone. And for gender marker changes, some states don't allow gender marker changes at all. Some states will allow them on certain documents, not on other documents. Some require a proof of a sex change operation. Really? That's their words, not mine. Really? 2023. Before they'll even allow a gender marker change at all. On a happy note, 24 states have implemented an X gender marker on their documents for our non-binary friends. And then once you get that court-ordered change, then the real fun happens, where you get to update all of your stuff. Documents like social security card, driver's license, passport, and don't get me started on credit cards and other accounts. Some of my stuff is still not changed, and it's been years. In fact, yesterday was my anniversary of my name change, as a matter of fact.
Happy anniversary.
4 years. Thank you. I just remembered that. That's weird. It's really a daunting process, and it costs both time and money that some folks may not have. And it requires us to come out as trans plus over and over and over to those same customer service phone agents that I talked about before who are misgendering you. I am happy to say that I was born in a state where I mailed them $20 and a copy of my court documents, and they mailed me back a new birth certificate that said, "It's a boy." And then my dad and stepmom had a party. Most states have orgs that can help, like I mentioned, so find the ones in your states. If you're not sure, again, NCTE, contact us here at Intuit. We will help get you to the right place.
Rigo, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, about IDs, I'm glad you mentioned that it's not the same process if you're changing your name from marriage or something like that. So again, it's complicated, depends on where you live, at least in the United States. But just think about if you have a trans person in your life or you're thinking about how to be more supportive at work, think about all those times that you might need to show an ID and just be mindful then that that simple action might not be so simple for your trans coworker or other trans person you're interacting with. So for example, something that comes up at work a lot is if you're traveling for work. You know, I remember the first time I took a business trip, then it got really confusing because I had not yet changed my name legally. And thankfully, my supervisor already anticipated that might be the case. And they asked me, hey, what's the name on the ID you're going to show on the airport? Let me help you book your ticket, knowing that wasn't the name I actually go by every day. That's just one example, but if you haven't thought about IDs much before, you can kind of take a lot of it for granted. So I encourage you to stop and think about all those times where you might show your ID and then put yourself in the shoes of someone whose ID might not be accurate at the moment, so you can help them navigate that process better.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna shift a little bit to allyship, and Ariana mentioned this earlier today, is that it's not just about being an ally, but moving into advocacy. And I think that's one of the biggest questions that most trans plus folks get is, how can I be a better ally to my people? And we're gonna start with passive allyship. So there is, including your pronouns in your email signatures, wearing pronoun lanyards and buttons, which they have on today. And then, of course, adding your pronouns to social media and communication app platforms. And while some of these may seem like unnecessary steps, they help support the trans plus community and create the opportunity to provide those around you with a better understanding of who you are. And is also a really great conversation starter. And passive allyship is, of course, a really great first step. And then there's the active allyship. So this is where we transition a little bit. See what I did there, Tanner? From allyship to advocacy. So this includes voting for trans plus inclusive rights and legislation, supporting trans plus led organizations and businesses in your local area, supporting your trans plus neighbors and coworkers, and most importantly in my mind is speaking out when somebody uses incorrect pronouns or a trans person's dead name. Rigo, a significant amount of the work at NCTE is regarding rights specifically at the state level. Why is it so important for allies to vote?
Well, it's so important to vote because no matter where you live, I guarantee you there is something cooking at the state level on trans rights, whether it's a positive affirming bill to increase our protections, or whether it's a negative attack on our community. But these things are happening all around the country and all around the world. You see here on the screen just how rapidly these anti-trans bills have grown in the United States. Right now, as of this moment, NCT is tracking 399 anti-trans bills in the United States. 399. That is astounding. And it is also literally unprecedented. This has never happened before. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the attacks. Now, it is important to remember that most of these bills will fail because people like us are fighting them all the time. So 399 introduced does not mean that 309 are going to pass. In fact, I'm confident we're going to beat most of them back. But the way we're going to guarantee that we beat most of them back is by all of us speaking out and getting involved. So please sign up for email action alerts with NCT. If you go to our website, sign up for our emails, we will keep you updated in real time, constantly moving forward. And we'll let you know when there's something happening in your state or wherever you live. And you can also check out our State Action Center. It's right there on our homepage, transequality.org. You go to State Action Center, you can click on your state and see what is pending right now. So yes, I see some people taking out smartphones. I hope you're signing up. Hope you do that at home too, transequality.org, and we'll keep you updated. And it's really important to keep in mind that this is true no matter where you live. Do not assume that it's not happening where you live. I guarantee you that this is all around us. Voting is going to be a critical part of how we beat this back over the long run. So next time there's an election in your area, don't wait for the presidential election if you're here in the United States. There's local and state level elections much more frequently than that. And your one vote can make a tremendous difference there because honestly, a lot of people don't vote and they skip those elections. So your ballot will go a really long way. So don't wait for the presidential vote in all of your local and state elections too. Bring a friend with you. Be like, hey, I'll get you brunch. We'll make a party out of it. Make voting fun, and that'll get your friends out to join you. And lastly, if you know someone who has changed their name recently for any reason, whether because they came out or they got married or anything, help them update their voter registration. Depending on where you live, it probably doesn't happen automatically. Your voter registration might be separate from your driver's license or things like that, depending on where you live. So you can reach out to NCT. We will help you fix that. But help your friend look up their voter registration so that they stay current and voting is as easy as it can be.
Absolutely. The entire idea of brunch after voting really makes a lot of sense for me. Sorry, everybody. What?
Bacon and ballots.
There we go.
That is now what we're doing on Tuesdays of Election Day. I believe we covered most of these, but definitely speaking up, having those conversations, really voting, using that as an opportunity to ensure that folks in your community are supported. So when we talk about allyship, a lot of people think about the ways we can support transgender adults. And we have, of course, touched a little bit on trans plus kids. And we, of course, want to see trans plus kids grow up to be trans adults. Tanner, what are ways that adults and parents can support their trans plus kids in their lives?
Yeah. I'm a parent. And as parents, we should be our children's fiercest protectors and advocates, no matter what. I don't know any of us as parents who, before our child was born, when somebody would say the inevitable, do you want a boy or a girl? None of us choose. We all said, I don't care as long as they're healthy. Look at us using they, them pronouns before our kid's even born. And this shouldn't stop when our children may take a different path than what was expected or what we expect of them. Our job as parents is to make sure our children can thrive when we are no longer on this earth to help protect them. This means showing children what unconditional love is. Letting them learn life lessons while we're still here to give them a safe place to fall if anything should go wrong, and letting them feel comfortable to be their unique selves, even if that person isn't who you envisioned before they were born. Have difficult conversations with your kids. Watch how you speak about people who are different from you. Be open to learning and evolving your own belief system, even if those beliefs are deeply rooted in your own sense of self. If those beliefs you have would ostracize your child, are they really the right ones? And adults who are just around kids every day who might not be parents, same as above. Don't make public examples of kids who display differences. Embrace their differences. Figure out why a kid failed that math test. And let me tell you, new math, old math, same thing. Don't make examples when there's differences. when they look different, when they sound different, when they just behave different from whatever norm, whatever that means, is. Wear a pride pin that says, I'm a safe space. Wear a BLM pin for the same reason. We are the adults, and we alone owe it to the kids to show that being vulnerable is not a weakness. It's a growth opportunity, which leads us all to being better humans.
Thanks, Tanner. So we've discussed the many ways to be an ally, and we would like to challenge you with a few actions today. First, be respectful and use people's correct pronouns and names. Add your pronouns to different social spaces, your work email, your school email, Slack teams, social messages, social media. Ask your trans plus friends and family where and when they need support. Donate your time and resources to organizations that support trans plus people like NCTE. Get personally involved in trans plus causes at the national and state levels. Tanner, you've worked alongside colleagues at Intuit to make incredible progress that we've seen here. What for other companies that are interested in doing this work, what are some of the first steps they can take?
Yeah. First of all, just create a safe space, right? With your policies, with your healthcare coverage, and be open about it and public about your stance and that you are a safe space. And next, sit down with them and learn and listen and just have open minds and open hearts, even if it's hard to hear, even if your employees don't frame things the way you wish they would, even if they tell you that there's some really toxic things going on, just listen. Then you can build action plans and execute on them and make things better for the future. Benchmark your benefits package against WPATH, against other companies. Put Intuit on that list because we're pretty high up there on the list there. And then make sure that those benefits apply to the children of your employees too, not just the employees themselves. Make sure you allow self-ID for gender identity. Make sure your trans plus employees and employees' children have a safe space where they can build community and help each other through difficult situations. Get involved with the NCTE's efforts on improving outcomes for trans plus folks. And then if you're not sure, reach out to us at Intuit, and we'd be happy to help your organization build a plan. And then actively seek out and recruit trans plus employees and promote us to all areas of leadership, including the very top. Please, please. We want to see ourselves in every aspect of the company.
Thanks, those are great. Enrico, what are some other ways in which we can, other companies can do the same work, and how, what are some other resources available?
Well, we have tons of resources on our website, so I'm going to shamelessly plug again, transequality.org. We have a lot of content there that delves further into any of these issues. So if you want to learn more about healthcare or about housing and other topics we didn't have time to get into today, you can find that out on our website. And we also have a lot of things that we went over here on stage today, like definitions, on our website as well. So that can be really helpful if you're having to have this kind of conversation with someone in your life who's maybe not as informed or not as supportive. We have a lot of language you can use to navigate those conversations in as productive of a way as possible. So check out our website. You can also follow us on social media to stay current on everything that's happening, which is critical, especially with all of the state legislation here in the United States and how rapidly things are moving. It's hard to stay on top of it all. So following us on social media is a good way to do it. Our handle is Trans Equality on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and we're Trans Equality Now on Facebook and Instagram. So really encourage folks to check us out online.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Rigo and Tanner, for your time today. I know I have truly enjoyed spending time with you, and I know that our audience has as well. We have learned so much about the nuances of the trans plus experiences, the barriers to what it means to live authentically, and how to be an ally as well as advocate for trans plus people. So throughout this session, we have had folks submit questions through our Slido. If you have a question, feel free to scan the QR code on your screen or submit it through slido.com. So I'm going to open it up for questions. All right. So the first question I have from our Slido is, I often see allies hesitant to ask questions about trans issues because they think we will react negatively. In my experience, we are often careful in our responses to be overly polite or not, and to not endanger ourselves. How do we move allies away from this stereotype that we will snap if they ask? I'm going to put this to you, Rigo.
Sure. Well, I can definitely understand why an ally would be uncertain as to whether they should ask something or feel nervous about saying the wrong thing. I think that's really human. It was said earlier a few times, and I think it's really true, that we as trans people can largely tell when a question is well-intentioned and someone is genuinely trying to learn, as opposed to the question being coming from a place of not believing us and trying to interrogate us in some way. But for folks allies who are trying to figure out where the line is, I really recommend the rule of thumb of, is this relevant? And why am I asking this? Would I ask them this if they weren't trans? So is it relevant? And well, these kinds of rule of thumb are to guard against, for example, asking questions about maybe dating or medical history when you're coworkers. If you're not close enough that you don't talk about dating anyway, because you just don't know each other like that, then maybe don't ask about dating just because they're trans. That can feel weird. But if you are like work friends, right? A lot of us joke about having work wives or work spouses or work husbands. And you do talk about dating, then it is totally fine to still ask about dating. You don't have to go off of it just because they're trans and you're scared of saying the wrong thing. And if you are asking them something really just because they are trans, think about, is that relevant? Maybe it is, right? Because maybe you're trying to learn about the issue, and that's good. Or maybe it's just some kind of morbid curiosity, and then that's a sign it may not be appropriate. So those are sort of rules of thumb from the ally side of how to figure out whether you should ask that question or not. And then from our side as trans people, I heard in the question sort of how do we encourage more of that? I think just saying that directly is perfectly great and valid. If you can sense that someone is nervous, you can just name it and say, hey, I know that this might seem like a touchy subject. I'm totally comfortable talking about it if you have any questions. It's okay to name the elephant in the room, and that'll help everyone kind of ease that anxiety, I think.
Yeah, awesome. That was definitely super helpful. So Tanner, for you, what do you recommend to an organization where top leaders do show support and exemplify proper behaviors, but line leads or lower management do not exemplify respectful behaviors to LGBTQ+ employees?
Ooh, that's the question, isn't it? Especially in larger organizations, disconnects just happen. But I mentioned earlier about holding folks accountable and being accountable, and that's not a negative term. That's a, hey, I heard you say this the other day, and that's just not the right thing to do or the right way to approach this. It's having those open conversations with the folks on your team, and especially making time for those conversations with, say, middle management, middle leaders, who maybe they're already more focused on the deliverables that we have from a company standpoint, and they may just not be thinking about the personal aspect of interacting with the folks they work with every single day. And so really that accountability is just, hey, how, in maybe a staff meeting, a leadership staff meeting, how are folks, did you catch the Trans Summit the other day? And, or I caught the Trans Summit at Intuit the other day. Did you even know that existed? And have that conversation and see what reactions people have, and then hold them accountable to kind of speak up for maybe why they're reacting the way they may react. And again, that could be, I saw you react positively, or you made a face, you know, or, and making sure that the expectation that trickles down to everybody else, you know, so that everybody understands what's expected, whether it's deliverables from a business standpoint, or whether it's that interpersonal, you know, making sure that everybody feels like they can be here 100%.
Thank you. So Rigo, if my company or organization doesn't have a trans plus inclusive group or resources, or ERG, are there grants or funding sources available to create those spaces and keep them staffed and safe that you know about?
That's a great question. Well, if your company already does have ERGs on other basis, like if there are already affinity groups around breakdowns of race and ethnicity, or you know, if there is some kind of infrastructure for that kind of thing already, and it just doesn't exist when it comes to trans folks, I would recommend contacting whoever is the company's lead on those other groups, or ask the people who are the facilitators or the president or whatever it's called at your company of those other groups, and ask them, how do you get this funded? Because really, you as the person who wants to start the trans group should be able to access the same infrastructure, the same resources, and go through the same channels as any other employee resource group. So do your research and talk to whoever is your company lead on that, or the lead on those other affinity groups or ERGs, and go through those same channels. And then about getting other funding, at some places, some companies already have a direct allocation of every ERG is going to be staffed in this way, in which case you can make the case that, hey, you get the same recognition as everyone else. But if there isn't any other kind of pre-existing funding, ask around, do the research of other companies in that sector who also have their own ERGs, and do some networking with them, and you can use that as a pressure point, really, of sorts, and go to your company and say, hey, our competitors are already doing this. Our competitors are ahead of us in this way. We should catch up. There's a business case to be made for that, in addition to the benefits for employee morale. And then lastly, what if you work at a company that doesn't have any of this stuff at all? I would say start with HR. Go to your HR department and talk about the benefits of having some kind of group like this. And it is totally legitimate to start small. You don't have to intimidate yourself by trying to think, I'm going to make the trans summit that Intuit has and all at this level of being elaborate. You can start by just having an informal club of sorts, so that at least people can connect and get to know each other, like how it did start at Intuit. And it can gradually build into something of this scale.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, everything starts small, and building those opportunities. I also like the call out of, if they already exist in your organization, then there can also be a trans plus organization as well, or an LGBTQ organization. So Tanner, for you, if you suspect someone is using the wrong pronouns for someone else publicly, without assuming their pronouns based on their looks, what can you do or say to intervene and help advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's an excellent question. And it's important to know, if that person doesn't have their pronouns displayed, you may not know. And so it's probably good to not say anything in the moment, but then reach out to that person after the fact and just say, hey, my pronouns are he, him. We haven't really worked together much. Could I ask your pronouns just to make sure that I am getting it right? And then if they give you a pronoun that maybe doesn't match, assumptions or, what our preconceived notions are, then you can say to them, I noticed in the meeting that folks were misgendering you. I am an ally. I want to help. How can I help you? Because some folks will say, please don't do that in the moment, right? And some folks will say, absolutely call them out. And so everybody's different. And each meeting might be different, right? Okay, call them out if it's our work group. Don't call them out if it's our CEO or whatever it is, right? I mean, our CEO, call him out, but he's not going to mess up. But, that just shows caring, and say, how can I show up for you? And by the way, do that for other folks. If somebody on your team has an ability challenge or something, and maybe they need a little extra time speaking, right? And you notice that they may struggle, you can ask them, like, how can I show up for you so that people don't think that, I don't know, a pause or, something like a stammer or something is a problem, because people start kind of talking over others, right? It's not just a trans plus thing.
Yeah.
It's everybody.
Absolutely. Well, that is about time. So if you have other questions, of course, please feel free to submit them in the Slido. Our incredible chat moderators will be moderating all day long. I want to thank you both so much for being here. It's been really great working on this project with you and sharing your stories.